Hi everyone, and welcome to Noona's Noonchi, where I do a deep dive into some of our favorite K-dramas from a mental health perspective. It's National Suicide Prevention Week, and I want to highlight the K-drama Taxi Driver to talk about suicide. Taxi Driver, Mobile Taxi. It is on Viki starring Lee Je Hoon, and it is good. It is a crime drama, not normally my genre. My genre is healing dramas, family dramas, rom-com, but it got such rave reviews and so many people talking about it, good ratings. I was like, quality over quantity. Let me check it out with my husband. And I did, and it is good. It's triggering. Suicide is a theme, and that is why I'm going to tie it in to National Suicide Prevention Week, because I want to talk about suicidality. Suicidality is that term that encompasses three things: suicidal ideation, thinking about suicide, making suicide plans, and suicide attempts. This is a common theme in K-dramas. You know what I mean. Not necessarily a trope, but we see it often. Why? Because the suicide rate is high in Korea. It's a big part of our Asian culture. I'm going to break it down for you. And it's very important to know about. My job is dispelling mental health stigma. So the more we talk about something uncomfortable and even triggering like suicide, the better. The more you know, the better. The more questions you ask, the better. National Suicide Prevention Week is here in the US, but I want you guys abroad to know about it too. Now in Taxi Driver, Lee Je Hoon, the main character, the premium taxi driver, he's like a vigilante. The premise there is folks who have been through, the toughest of all things, and they come together as a team, Rainbow Taxi Company, and take revenge, 복수, for those who want it, for those who come to them for help. Now what's interesting is Taxi Driver, the company is advertised on the bridges, right, in a sticker that says, "Don't kill yourself. Take revenge." It's in Korean, 복수해, right? Instead of that. And they do. They come and see that. And the people that have seen it are literally about to jump off the bridge, take their own life. Not only have they thought about it, they are literally following through with attempting suicide. What's interesting that I found is that note, Taxi Driver, call us, we'll help you, take revenge, gives them their last bit of hope. Hope is key. No one can take away your hope, y'all. So you can always have hope in the darkest times. Let's break down the risk factors of suicide. So in Taxi Driver, the characters that literally were about to jump off the bridge, let's think from the first case, the young girl that was going through workplace abuse. She was intellectually disabled and she was being abused at work. Horrible things that were triggering as you were watching. I'm like, but I believe it can happen. Yeah, some of it was very realistic. And then we have a kid, another case in Taxi Driver, extreme bullying. I mean, oh my gosh, you're watching this and almost hating the kids doing it to him. That's hard for me to say because I try to see all sides as a mental health clinician. But this kid thought about it, then as wit's ends, seeing his mom crying, but still felt helpless and hopeless and worthless and almost did it. And then the Taxi Driver note came up. And then we have actually one of the main girl characters who's part of the Rainbow Taxi team. She's the hacker. You know, you gotta love the hackers who help you get into the systems. And her sister died of suicide. Okay, one note. Committed suicide is not the right thing to say. In fact, what it does is lump it as a crime, like committing murder, committing adultery. So instead of saying committing suicide, which we're all guilty of, including myself, I have to watch myself, you want to say things like died of suicide, died from suicide death. That is the way to say it, because we're trying to break that stigma surrounding suicide. There's so many layers to suicide that it's difficult to understand. And yes, one of the most difficult things to grasp if you are a survivor of somebody, of a loved one that died of suicide or attempted suicide. It's not about understanding why. Let's not do that, okay? Let's understand how to help, how to prevent. That is why we have something called National Suicide Prevention Week in the US. Suicide is preventable. And in the K-dramas that we see, most of the time that you're seeing it, it's a theme, whether someone has actually died of suicide or thought about it. It's preventable, as we can see, and that is why it grips us, because those stories of hopelessness and helplessness and feeling less than or being a burden, worthless. But the circumstances surrounding suicide, as we see from the K-dramas, abuse, bullying, trauma, helpless, hopeless circumstances. And by the way, in the K-dramas, we see them surrounding those conditions. A risk factor for suicide is mental illness, but that's not what we generally see, especially in the K-dramas, right? And in my line of work, based on my own data, I see it based on difficult, adverse circumstances where suicidal ideation, suicidal plans, and suicidal attempts come up. Constantly studying it because it's a big part of my work, especially working with the Asian population. Now, why do we see suicide as a common theme in K-dramas? Korea has the #1 suicide rate in the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. But that is a big, big deal. And so it's commonly threaded in the K-dramas because of that. Now, I'm not in Korea. I can't address that situation as much, but I can in the US. And I also, for those watching, if you're abroad, understand this. The more you talk about suicidality, remember I just explained those 3 things, the more that you can dispel the stigma surrounding it, come to an understanding about it, and get more comfortable to work through it. Does that make sense? No one can take away your hope. In Taxi Driver, the revenge, Poksu, is their hope. Now, revenge is multi-layered. I don't exactly condone it, but when it comes to K-dramas, I do. Because the way it's displayed in the K-dramas, it's more of not like the revenge as we used to see, let me kill somebody as revenge, which can be the case. But in the K-dramas, it's about what can you do to call it even, get back at them, have them or the people that hurt you feel the same pain and more. So that's why it's so rewarding watching this drama, because you see what the Rainbow Taxi Company and Lee Je Hoon's character, the mobile taxi, do to help revenge or avenge these people that were hurt, in pain, and literally thinking of taking their life or about to take their life. They were this close, and then that note saved them. Very well done. But now in that case of that main lead, the girl, one of the main leads, her sister actually dying of suicide is tragic. And that is what she does in her work to basically avenge her sister's death and do everything to work through her own pain and that trauma. So that can help too. Here are the risk factors of suicide. And these are just some of them, right? Mental illness, yes. Substance use, difficult circumstances, trauma, terrifying circumstances, post-traumatic stress, all of the above that you see in K-dramas. Yes, those are the risk factors, right? And yes, history of suicide in your family is also a risk factor, just like alcoholism, right? So be aware of that, but you can break the patterns. There is hope that you don't have to follow that same. It may haunt you, but work through it with hope. What are the protective factors? Connection is key. In Taxi Driver, why did the people get off the ledge and decide not to kill themselves? It's because they saw that there is hope, because somebody else says, don't do it. We're here for you. Come to us. That is why there's suicide prevention hotlines. To be able to talk it through is key. It's not about scolding or being like, really? You have a great life? Let's not say that to those people who are thinking about suicide or making suicide plans, who have attempted it. Let's not come to understand why. Let's just help them work through it and talk about prevention and the how to work through it. Protective factors. Focus on that, right? Because we can get stuck, especially if you're a survivor of somebody who died of suicide and who or attempted suicide. I've seen that. I've worked with those folks. It is difficult. I hear you. But to give you hope to work through it, just like the taxi company did in Taxi Driver, it helps. First of all, when you're thinking of revenge and coming up with plans to work through something, it gives you that motivation. That's super important. Why do you live? What gets you out of bed? What's the purpose? That's super important to think. But the first thing is finding help. First of all, through mental health support, clinicians like myself, your medical provider, go to them as well if they're the first source of contact. Yes, they can also help you and connect you to the right people. And then family, friends, and maybe it's not family. Maybe it's not friends, maybe it's coworkers or a support group, whatever that is, connect. And if you're on the other side of it, meaning if you're noticing troubling behavior, someone talking about suicide, someone saying things like, yeah, I don't know why I'm here. Why do I live? I'm hopeless. I'm such a burden. Life is so hard. When you hear those terms, it's a little bit of a red flag, but I don't want you to get alarmed. Why not talk it through with that person? What's going on? Ask open-ended questions and even bring up, it sounds like you're thinking about suicide. If you hear it in their language, always go with your gut. Your gut is your second brain. So I always tell folks that when they ask, but if I bring it up, what if it makes them think about it more? I don't necessarily think that's the case. And research shows that's not necessarily the case. The more you talk about it, the easier and the more connected the person feels to talk about it. That is not a stigma. That is actually why some people follow through with it and die of suicide, because it's stigmatized and they feel like they had no one to talk to. So that said, National Suicide Prevention Week, I'm not saying to watch Taxi Driver. I just wanted to bring up that drama that made me really think this through and highlight the purpose of this week, September 5th to 11th, National Suicide Prevention Week, and then World Suicide Prevention Day, September 10th, for those of you abroad. There are many resources, but first, turn to those you are most comfortable with. Now, what's interesting in Taxi Driver, people turn to those folks, they're driving a taxi and Lee Je Hoon's looking all like cool, mushy soul with the glasses. Yeah, you got to give it to that. He does some great stuff in there. And you're like rooting for him all the way because you know his purpose, which, by the way, all the characters working for this company have sad, tragic stories behind them of people died of suicide, died of murder, right? Or arson or whatever that is. So they're driven by that as well. And that keeps their hope alive. Hope again, hope, hope. Hope is a big thing in mental health and in therapy. I say, aside from the therapeutic alliance, my alliance with my client and the belief that I have in my client and you believing in me to help you is also your own hope. And then that builds your resilience. So always know that you can have hope for a greater life out there. I'm getting emotional because I want you to understand this. And this K-dramas that we watch, that we see, let's look at it further. Even in True Beauty, I thought it was very well done. No one wanted to talk about their friend who died of suicide because he was ridiculed and bullied. Do you see that? That is probably very common in Korea. And let's talk about facts too. In Korea, I believe the elderly have the highest suicide rates, while poverty, socioeconomic status, not being cared for. Young generation now focus on career and not really caring for their elders. There's not a reason of why and because they need to do and making anybody feel guilty. No, none of that. It's just that that's what's going on. And then we have the young population. Nationally speaking, the latest rates that I see is it is the second leading cause of death after accidents, suicide is, among this population, ages 10 to 34. 10, age 10. That's gripping to me, but I believe it. And then in the last 18 months of COVID and political strife, economic strife, social strife, racism, so much more that we need to look at when it comes to suicidality. And in my book, A is for Authentic, this is not a plug for my book, but I talk about my own suicidal ideation based on such stress. So you don't have to necessarily be struggling with a mental illness or substance use or to the extreme. It can happen, those thoughts, because you feel so overwhelmed. That is why I'm such a big proponent of managing stress. So there's a lot of things that I'm talking about here. But I want to be clear on the protective factors of what you can do to prevent suicide. You talk about it. You connect with someone that you can talk to about it. Bring it up to those friends that you are concerned about. And if you get an adverse reaction, you do stop and hope that you can direct them to somebody who can help them. Maybe it's not you. But also, please don't not say anything. Read up on it. Learn about it, and always go with your gut. If you don't feel good about something, your gut being your second brain, err on the side of caution and bring it up. And no, it doesn't make the person think about it more. If anything, it may help them feel that hope. Poksu in terms of Taxi Driver, taking revenge, not literally, but taking things into their own hands and being like, I got this, I have hope, I can make my life better by doing X, Y, and Z, whatever it is, to work through that abuse, domestic violence, trauma, post-traumatic stress, situations that they can't avoid, the community perhaps the which they live that is unsafe, where they don't feel psychologically safe, or even their mental illness that they haven't treated. Whatever the circumstances, I believe that you can work through it. Suicide is preventable. That is why we have National Suicide Prevention Week. So on that note, if you're up to it, feel free to watch Taxi Driver if you want to learn more about it and watch how it's done. K-dramas, K-drama world, folks, people making those K-dramas, great job in how you show suicide, but because it's clear, you're including it in those storylines because it's a big part of Korean culture, Asian culture. But perhaps we talk about it more and have those conversations of how we can prevent it, not why it happened. You can discuss that, and sure, that's difficult, that's the grief, but moving on for that, because you have to be able to prevent further and talk about what you can do to help others. Now take a look at these resources. I hope these will help you. And if you have any further questions, feel free to DM Noona's Noonchi. Thanks for watching Noona's Noonchi. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell button to get notified of new episodes to come.